discussing Peace of Mind with Typescript, Angular edition. He's a Google developer expert in web technologies and Angular who is very passionate of performance and design. Welcome, Dmitry.
Hello, folks. Hopefully you're doing great and enjoying these presentations, which we have seen before, as much as I do, because I actually have some notes from previous talks, which I'm going to Google and actually use in my work moving forward. But as for my presentation and what I want to speak about is peace of mind, in particular, front-end developers. I'm front-end developer for some reason. Well, started like as C++ and backend developer still doesn't know CSS at all. Not many people believe me, but that's true. And one of the things, especially several years ago, there was in particular a fear of missing something when you was not actually reading Twitter too much, or you was not following proper people who has updates on the web. Something has changed and you need that stuff. There was a fear, and it's still fear of change of your application, fear of change of the framework you use and stuff like that. And of course, the fear of upgrade between versions. So people who survived upgrading to Angular 2 or like from React to React hooks know what I'm speaking of, but there is still a fear of doing those things. While we actually live in a great time when we have a TypeScript, which became very, very popular. And to speak of why it became popular or who made it popular, let's speak about the person who is in charge of the TypeScript, the Microsoft lead engineer who was in charge of the TypeScript at the time. And when he was speaking, I suppose, on some kind of interview, he mentioned that there was, if you'll take a look on the GitHub stars or NPM downloads, there was a moment of time when Angular team decided to go with TypeScript and announced that in May at NG conference. After that, TypeScript just butt rocket to the sky from the point where it was and never looked back. If to speak about what we're gonna face in the future, because most of the fears we have is mostly about we are looking in the future and we are not sure what is going to happen next. To better understand what is going to happen next, we should take a look in the past. And when I was driving that, I actually understood that I'm working with TypeScript almost like 9 years, and it was like yesterday. It's 9 years ago in 2012 when father of C#, and I was C# developer at that time, announced a TypeScript, which was a very interesting idea, very not support, very breaking. But still, it was a great thing because like at those time, when you was working with JavaScript, it was jQuery, of course, you had to test everything at runtime. I had a joke that if you do some kind of unit test, those unit tests should have 300% coverage, because you not only testing your business logic, you actually test the language where you run your code. So next year, just for reference, it was released by Facebook React, and in 2014 was released a tool. I could skip the name if somebody will be able to guess and write that. It would be awesome. But actually, it's like flow type, which at the moment was much, much more popular than TypeScript. And nobody actually believed that TypeScript is upgrade for the web at that time. So like ESLint was never like until recently, maybe like last or 2 years, was even looking on the TypeScript as a platform. They should support like LinkedIn, right? So, and we speak about like 7 years ago, and huge React community was praising Flow type checker, and everybody happy about that. And next year, on 2015, there was a case when Angular switched from their A script to TypeScript. And that's very important thing, because from that point and in next 5 years, TypeScript became second after Rust, most wanted language, according to Stack Overflow questionnaire, right? So if we speak about this thing, it has a pretty long history and it's gone to success and actually dominate the web. So if we speak about like fear or future proofing for TypeScript, we are pretty solid here, right? And that sounds actually great because you then don't have to think like, what should I use? Maybe reasonable, maybe Flow, maybe TypeScript. At this time and the next maybe decade, most likely if you want to use static type checking on your JavaScript development flow, that will be TypeScript. And this is actually great. You still have an options, but you have a dominant version, which most people currently are able to understand. If you go on an interview and you're asking people right now, JavaScript developers, what is interface, right? You have a like great chance this person will be able to explain it to you. While 5 years ago, if you was asking JavaScript developer, what is an interface, most likely you will not get any response at all. But what other part except Angular which made TypeScript such a popular thing? Most importantly, that it had a very great companion, which is Visual Studio Code. TypeScript got really great support in IDEs, because the tool which we get used to and most of engineers don't even notice right now how great it is IntelliSense. Because 20 years ago, there was no IntelliSense at all. You had to actually read the books, not much of a Google. You had to read the books to know the API of what you're going to use. Right now, you have a really great IntelliSense. And compared to JavaScript, where it just lists everything, what it knows about object prototype, and maybe trying to guess whatever properties you have. Right now, with TypeScript in IDE, you have really great list of things which are properly to this type and has documentation about what you can pass up there. And if you speak about like partly jokes like side, but Angular TypeScript equals love, because love is not when you look on each other, love is when you look in the same direction. And in different times when different people who was responsible for TypeScript and Angular, you can find that TypeScript was built for large and scalable applications, and the exactly same phrase is used for Angular when they explain why Angular has dependency injection, has pretty much of module structure, and so on and so on. And going to the like more serious topic, so let's take a look briefly on the history of TypeScript and Angular. So we know their history together before our time, but what these days TypeScript give us, right? Because previously, maybe even like 2-3 years ago, I remember that story when trying to release ECMAScript 2015, support for browsers, it was a pain. After that, things became more smooth on this front. And that time, TypeScript provided more like an option for you to use new JavaScript features which are not yet globally available in the browsers or not, like an environment you use. On other hand, we spoke about better developer experience with IDEs. And of course, the most important thing about TypeScript is actually providing it types. So you have a type annotation for your dynamic language, which is the most great thing about it, because type checking, that what gives you upper hand in the conversation with your code, and people who look in your code or use your libraries are able to understand what it is, how it behaves, and have pretty good understanding of that. And the last but not least, which I will be mentioning several times, is a strict mode. We'll not go in deep on this slide about what it is, why you should use that, but we should understand that making TypeScript strict made a point of no return, where applications split in two parts, strict or no strict. Of course, not strict application can consume anything, but strict application is when you say that my application actually will not have 90-something% of runtime issues, because it will be strict in terms of static type checking. But what brings Angular on top of TypeScript? And here we go to again a great point, because there are a thing in Angular which is Angular language service, which provides you IntelliSense in HTML templates, where you can know what kind of Angular components attached to this particular HTML node, what kind of attributes or events they have, what kind of type of the property this attribute can consume, or what type will be of this event. It's not you're trying to guess anymore. It's pretty much you are able, on top of standard HTML elements and attributes and properties they have, you're actually able to see and use the benefits of IDE, IntelliSense, and HTML, which is really, really great. And if you're going to the strict mode, which Angular made default one for a new project generated in Angular 12. So it's like a couple of months this May, and moving forward, which is really, really great, because that's became like one way or another for any new project generated with Angular 12. You have, you will see the developers who, like, there will be, of course, initial struggling with that part, but quality of front-end applications will rise because it's default now. Default always makes a difference. And when we speak about strict for TypeScript, right, how Angular can use that even better, and type checking in general. Of course, they have very nice feature, which you can do strict templates. So if we speak about Angular components, which by nature was, I would say, prefaced, because many things which are normal today, like web components, for example, was developed initially in some other languages like syntax sugar. So I would say Angular components and their HTML is a syntax sugar that eventually became a web component. And when we speak about strict templates, that means, and like full template type check, that means that you are able to actually check what the types of the properties which was sent to your component or some other component, whatsoever. And this makes really, really great improvements for us in terms of removing the fear of change, removing the fear of not knowing how it will behave or how things will connect. Because when you call in one function from another, and you send in params in TypeScript, you in particular on compile time know how it will behave, which was not a thing for whenever you actually connect same components, which actually functions at some level, right? And you never know how they will interoperate. You was not able to check except the runtime how they will communicate with each other, how will they behave later. But before we will get to the compile time, if we speak about our fears, one of the biggest fears was managing dependencies and upgrading. Then we go for linting, compiling, and runtime, where TypeScript and Angular compilation could help us to manage those fears. So if we speak about managing dependencies, on install time, most people would say that TypeScript does not matter, which is particularly true. It doesn't help you to install dependencies, right? What it helps you to achieve when you're choosing what to install, there are pretty much of factors. That could be a clear JavaScript module without typings. And you know that most likely it will have runtime issues. Then you have a JavaScript libraries which has additional typings. Then you know that it most likely have an issue at runtime, but on the other hand, you will be able to have all the benefits of your IDE, right? And you don't have to go for documentation to look for some kind of property type or documentation like of some methods provided by this library. You will be able to see this from your IDE at the moment you write the code. Third type of libraries is TypeScript written. That's very important because then you see that most likely And there was a research around 4 years ago that TypeScript on its own helps to avoid 15% of JavaScript runtime issues. That was done 3 years plus minus before strict mode appears. So when you install a library which has TypeScript strict mode enabled, you could most likely think, like 90% sure, don't fear that it will have runtime issues related to improper typing or some kind of communication inside of this library, which is great. And of course, when you upgrade your libraries, what could happen on upgrade? We'll skip like JavaScript libraries, which doesn't support TypeScript because TypeScript doesn't will help you too much, except that on the latest releases, you are not able, like it's not only can allow you to use JavaScript libraries, now it has a parameter to check JavaScript. It tries to guess what kind of types those properties has inside of the libraries, which of course makes your build a bit slower, but you can be more relaxed about it. So if you upgrade a libraries which has a TypeScript type annotation, first thing you will notice that as soon as you did that, your IDE will say you that if you most likely have some issues with consumption of that library, if any. And of course, on compile time, it will be even more radical is that as soon as you compile and the typings for some parts of the library have changed, you will be able to see and track those issues of consumption of JavaScript, actually JavaScript libraries with type annotations at compile time, see runtime, possible runtime issues, which is great because fixing and testing in runtimes, times much more slower, much more cost efficient to see issues on the build rather than on runtime or when actual consumers report it to you. And of course, you're able with TypeScript, you're really easy to track what kind of dependencies you use and drop whatever you don't need to. Going to the linting, it will be a small, really smart part because whatever ESLint has for JavaScript now works with TypeScript. On top of that, you have all the benefits of TestLint, which is like type check. In short, when you think about that, like linting could be good, it could be opinionated. Yes, it could be. But if to think about that in history, most of the strict flags, which are currently in TypeScript, before that was the rules on this linting part. So LinkedIn first tests and gets an approval from the community, and eventually it gets injected into TypeScript. Most common issues got injected into TypeScript compiler itself, and now available through the flags or as a part of the strict flag, which is again great. And then you have a LinkedIn which works on top of ESLint, but it really depends for an Angular, which again adds you a layer to check not only how your TypeScript code is organized, but what is more important, helps you to check how your HTML code is organized, how components use each other, and how they interoperate, which is awesome. Basically, for people who for 10 or 20 years have a fun with JavaScript, could really appreciate whatever TypeScript benefits provides you on a level of development, especially people who is working with huge templates do understand that if you are able to type check your template, which is HTML, it's great because at compile time with Angular, you are able to see same issues which you are getting used to see when you compile TypeScript. So you are able to fix those in terms when you do compilation. This is really, really cool because NGC stands for ngx Angular compiler is TypeScript compiler wrapper, not more, not less. Under the hood, HTML is parsed to a set of TypeScript instruction, which helps NGC to track down those inconsistencies between usage between Angular components, how do they operate with each other, or how those used. Maybe some additional things which will be added later on. And of course, compile time check on TypeScript which is always provided by TypeScript. Additionally, we have checks which are done according to the structure, because as people love say, Angular is opinionated language. So you actually could track issues like your service is in the wrong place, it's trying to inject something wrong or something you would not know until you got at runtime. But with Angular, when you have pretty strict structure of interdependency and usages between each other, so if you use component and this component is not known by structure. So for example, if you speak about web components, which would be a great sample, if you're trying to use an HTML, some kind of element which is provided by web component, right? But that web component is not yet loaded to the browser. You have zero chances to figure it out that before you will run that in a browser. But with Angular, you will know that at compile time. If it's not known to a browser, Angular will say, hey, look here, you forgot to actually tell me what kind of component you use here in your HTML, which is great. And I would say not many of the libraries frameworks has this kind of functionality, which help you to enable strict template check, which is counterpart to TypeScript and TypeScript strict mode, and he allows you to check the things you're actually using HTML. If you think about it, give it a second thought. You type check in HTML. This is insane and insanely great, I suppose. If you speak about my phrase, that was actually like 4 years ago. Folk was made actual study work for an institute. They was mostly comparing at that time Flow and TypeScript 2, which reduced amount of JavaScript runtime issues by 15%. If we go right now for any kind of pretty huge application, which was written 4 years ago, and will enable strict mode, strict templates, which I actually did last month. I've had actually that experience of enabling strict mode and upgrading to like latest version. 90% of runtime issues or even more, we was able to fix at the time of compilation. The only thing which we was not able to fix, of course, is consumption of API endpoints or some like other things which are out of our reach at compile time. And if to get back to right, or what we're actually speaking of, right? If you speak about like how much future-proof the things we do, right? We could split that in several parts. First part is the language you use, like JavaScript or TypeScript, right? We spoke about that. It's almost 10 years old. It only improves. Any new things developed right now, consumers like split those intentionally or not intentionally. And like if it's developed with TypeScript, it's most likely better than the things which developed with just JavaScript, right? So TypeScript here with us for a long time. Second part for future-proof, to not like to say it loud, future-proof is of a product, a system which is unlikely to become obsolete, right? If you speak about the platform itself, like a browser, hopefully it's with us for a long time. But if you speak about libraries or frameworks we use, which mostly change from time to time. But the great thing about TypeScript in Angular, about being frameworks for such long time, for people like me who was from first days of those on release or before release, they could actually see that Angular TypeScript was defining the web. So things which was used or provided, you was able to use, I would say, with TypeScript eventually became a part of the standard for JavaScript. The things which we used in Angular from the day zero, like modules, now at ECMAScript modules, we use Angular components with annotation for inputs, events, your welcome web components, and metadata for custom elements. And there are plenty of those things which you could take a look in the history, which was up there in Angular. Even when we say like things are compiled to web components and custom elements, although things existed in Angular for the last 3 years, he was able to compile Angular to custom elements for long time before. I suppose I have still a minute or two. And when we speak about peace of mind, to wrap that up, that's a feeling of calm or not being worried. So for my peace of mind, it's very, very important that I choose a tool set, a language, platform, and a tool set, which I know that they will exist for years to come. And as we discussed, that was a thing, and it will be the thing for many years, especially taking into account that Angular is developed by Google, and Google is actually a company not about search, it's a company about advertisement, right? And 90% of the tooling are in monorepo inside of the Google, built mostly with Bazel, and it uses Angular. 90% of the profit generated by for Google, generated by tools which are written in Angular. Just to jump off such a thing, they will require at least 5 years. Not taking account they will have to develop some other framework. So my peace of mind that I don't worry too much about what I'm going to choose for next big project I'm going to be involved. I know for sure what I'm going to use, and I know that it will exist for years and years to come, which helps me to not worry about those decisions I have to make. I worry only about the product I have to develop. And that makes me much more relaxed about those decisions. Thank you so much. I suppose this word goes to Corinne.
Thank you.
For Q&A.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question for you. Peggy, I'll pass it over.
Hi. So we haven't received any questions from participants so far, but we will encourage everyone to submit them right now if you have any for Dmitry, and feel free to also pop in the chat.
It's I would say like a couple of words because I still have a time, and the speaker was counting for a particular time to start. I think that this kind of speech is very it's very new to me, because usually I speak about pretty technical native things. I'm really critical about the technology itself and always looking for some bugs. And this is the first time I was trying to look for a positive perspective on what we do right now and how to evolve in the future. Of course, there are like other frameworks and libraries which has their usage. I really love some of them. But if I speak about which of those gives me actually feeling of stable, being stable in the next years, because it's really important on who and where makes decision. But in this case, I really do understand that in years to come, I have an option which I can use, and it's really great and solid. So thank you for such an opportunity to have such kind of presentation with a different point of view on the things I use daily for the last maybe 8 years.